Good afternoon. My name is Cristina Dondi. I am a book historian from Lincoln College, Oxford, and I will be the mistress of ceremonies today. I first met Lilian Armstrong in Oxford in 1996 when I joined the team of Christian Jensen to catalog the incunabula of the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Lilian was one of our specialist advisors. We would save throughout the year the books for her attention, and she would come in the summer, and we will show her all the difficult work to be done. In one of those occasions, she almost jumped off her chair because, as you will see a picture in the PowerPoint, we showed her a copy of the Clementines with a fabulous picture of Hercules and Antaeus, a drawing, which she was able to assign to the work of Marco Zoppo. Lilian was also the advisor later on to the 15th Century Book Trade project, which is a project I led a few years ago. And indeed, she was an editor for material evidence in Incunabula database. Notwithstanding her exceptional knowledge, Lilian was a lifelong learner, a distinctive trait of the greatest scholars. I would like now to invite here to welcome you Federica Toniolo, who is full professor at the University of Padua, and her research focuses on medieval and Renaissance Italian manuscripts of the Italian courts, mostly Ferrara and Urbino. In addition to her numerous books and articles, she has co-curated several exhibitions and contributed to volumes on Italian choir books and cuttings. Her research interests include illustrated incunabula and early printed books. With Lilian Armstrong and Piero Scapecchi, she co-authored the Catalogue of Incunabula of the Library of the Bishopric Seminar of Padua. Federica.
Benvenuti a tutte e a tutti. È un piacere per l'Istituto Veneto di Scienze, Lettere ed Arti avervi qui oggi e ospitare qui a Palazzo Franchetti la presentazione del volume dedicato a Lilian Armstrong e anche congiuntamente ricordare il valore della sua ricerca e del suo magistero. La scelta di Jill Armstrong, cara nipote di Lilian, a cui dobbiamo per gran parte l'organizzazione di questo incontro, non poteva essere più adeguata. L'Istituto Veneto di Scienze, Lettere ed Arti che ci ospita, già di fondazione ottocentesca, è un'accademia che ha proprio come fine l'incremento, la diffusione e la tutela delle scienze, delle lettere e delle arti, e lavora in collaborazione con accademie, università e enti di ricerca, sia a livello nazionale che internazionale. E oggi qui possiamo proprio dire di essere internazionali. Come è ovvio, molti dei progetti che l'Istituto promuove riguardano la storia di Venezia. E Lilian ha fatto di Venezia il centro o uno dei centri privilegiati della sua ricerca. È a lei che dobbiamo l'aver messo in luce l'importanza dell'illustrazione libraria nei manoscritti e soprattutto negli incunaboli prodotti a Venezia tra XV e XVI secolo, restituendo alla Serenissima il ruolo di protagonista nella cultura rinascimentale italiana e europea. Il titolo di uno dei primi volumi di Lilian, importantissimo, edito da Harvey Miller, Renaissance Miniature Painters and Classical Imagery, The Master of Putti and His Venetian Workshop, già credo bene identifichi le linee di ricerca principali della studiosa. Innanzitutto, in questo titolo, l'illustrazione del libro è definita come pittura, mettendo subito in luce come i miniatori e i disegnatori di xilografie siano nella Venezia del tempo protagonisti del Rinascimento, alla stregua di Mantegna, Giovanni Bellini, il giovane Tiziano, o anche di scultori quali Lombardo, da Lilian veramente molto amati. Il titolo, inoltre, evidenziava come l'illustrazione libraria porti con sé, entro di sé, l'immaginario classico, reinterpreti e rivitalizzi l'antico, grazie, e qui le pagine del libro di Lilian sono chiarissime nel documentarlo, al rapporto tra il testo e l'immagine e alle scelte della committenza. Inoltre c'è una terza linea di ricerca, workshop. Lilian aveva capito l'importanza del concetto di bottega, di un mestiere, di un'organizzazione del lavoro, di competenze tecniche che possono essere apprese e trasmesse, sia dai miniatori di pennello, sia dai disegnatori. In nuce dunque vi erano già le traiettorie perseguite anche negli studi successivi da Lilian, che con grande passione, attraverso le giornate passate nelle biblioteche di Venezia, ma anche europee e americane, ha reso noto il patrimonio librario del Rinascimento veneziano e più in generale italiano. Quante personalità noi oggi conosciamo, dal Pico Master al maestro del London Pliny, Benedetto Bordon, ma anche Lilian si è interessata a nomi di tipografi, Genso, Manuzio, Luca Antonio Giunta. Quindi sono molte le prospettive di ricerca che ci ha lasciato, temi e problemi nei quali Lilian è stata una pioniera, insieme anche a Giordana Mariani Canova, tracciando metodologie, e a Jonathan Alexander, tracciando metodologie di indagini validissime che molti di noi hanno cercato di seguire e altri più giovani ancora oggi seguono. Però la figura di Lilian, sto per finire, non sarebbe completa se non citassi anche in questa prestigiosa accademia il suo magistero. Lilian ha insegnato per moltissimi anni a Wellesley l'arte del Rinascimento e in particolare l'arte veneziana e ha formato generazioni di studentesse e studiose, molte delle quali sono qui oggi e hanno avuto online e hanno avuto l'occasione di imparare da lei. Voglio però chiudere con una citazione di una storia personale, perché la cosa che anche più Lilian ha sempre dimostrato nei nostri confronti è l'incredibile generosità, della quale credo ognuno di noi oggi qui ha beneficiato. Nel luglio del 2017 le avevo scritto riguardo a un esemplare del De Civitate Dei nell'edizione veneziana di Gabriele Di Pietro, che avevo visto alla Biblioteca Angelica di Roma. Le chiedevo un parere sulle miniature che ritenevo di poter ricondurre all'Officina dei Maestri attiva a Urbino per Federico da Montefeltro. Questa è la parte della risposta della mail che ricevetti e con la quale concludo. The surprising coincidence about your question and the Angelica illuminated incunabulum is that I have just recently also been working on the two incunabula that I also think have Urbino illumination. One of them is in the Bancroft Library in Berkeley and completely unknown, and the other one is also in the Biblioteca Angelica. Perhaps you have also been doing research on the Angelica one? I had been thinking that I could write a short note about them, but I do not want to interfere with any project that you are writing. I will send the two images to you as attachment and would be pleased to know what you think about them. E concludeva come sempre con una nota di affetto. I hope you and Caterina, my daughter, are having some vacation time. Fondly, Lilian. Alla fine io pubblicai gli incunaboli ringraziando la maestra e amica. Grazie.
Thank you, Federica, for telling us about Lilian's pioneering and seminal contribution on Venetian artists who, in the crossing between the 15th and 16th century, really mastered different technologies working both in the manuscripts and in woodcuts, and as well as other medias. And also for telling us about generosity and the importance of teaching and the school that she's leaving behind. Thank you. I would like now to introduce the two editors of the volume we are celebrating today, Ilaria Andreoli and Elena Sepe. Ilaria Andreoli is a specialist of engraving and early modern book illustration, especially in Italy, Venice and Florence, and France, Lyon and Paris, in the 15th and the 16th century. She is scientific coordinator at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in Paris. She co-edited the book we are presenting today, along with Elena. Elena Sepe is professor of art history at the University of South Florida. Her 2018 book, Venice Illuminated, Power and Painting in Renaissance Manuscripts, won 2 awards: the American Historical Association's Marraro Prize for the best book in Italian studies, and the Gladys Kriebel-Delmas Prize for best book in Venetian studies. She is currently researching collections of leaves and cuttings in manuscripts collected by Johann Anton Rambaud, editing a book with Federica Toniolo, Chiara Ponchia, and Gian Mario Guidarelli on the nuns of Santa Croce della Giudecca here in Venice, and writing a book on illuminated manuscripts created by and for religious women in Venice. I would like to welcome Ilaria Andreoli.
Grazie a tutte e a tutti di essere qua oggi. Io sarò molto rapida perché i passeur de texte devono essere rapidi e efficaci. Quello che vorrei ricordare è una frase con cui Eugenio Battisti, in un libro ormai troppo dimenticato, L'Antirinascimento, dedicava i 2 volumi al padre che l'aveva invitato a inoltrarsi in campi non suoi. Ecco, questo trovo che è un insegnamento e veramente un incoraggiamento che Lilian ha dato a tutti noi, perché raramente una persona e un profilo scientifico, a parte forse la professoressa Canova e Elena qui di fronte a me, hanno saputo far coincidere e soprattutto inoltrarsi in campi non loro, dalla miniatura al libro a stampa e dal libro a stampa alla miniatura. Ancora oggi molti di noi qua tutti riuniti in questa sala si occupano dell'uno o dell'altro, raramente dei 2 insieme. E questo invito a inoltrarsi in campi non suoi per me è stato molto importante da parte di Lilian, che non è stato il mio professore e che io ho conosciuto in una città non mia, ma che è mia d'elezione di cuore, come in effetti Lilian è stata una maestra di elezione di cuore veramente molto molto importante anche nel percorso appunto apparentemente complicato di inoltrarsi in campi non sempre semplici, soprattutto in una situazione accademica italiana dove l'immagine riprodotta non è particolarmente valorizzata. E quindi sono molto felice di vedervi qua tutti a celebrare questa avventuriera in campi non suoi. Grazie.
Thank you, Ilaria, for reminding us how Lilian was so pioneering in exploring scholarly fields which often are still today divided. And with her example, she encouraged others to bridge the gap. And the results are always superior and more sounding. Elena, please.
Greetings. I want to thank each of you here today at Palazzo Franchetti, or attending virtually, because we have a number of people, I hope, who are attending virtually, for coming together to honor Lilian Armstrong and her remarkable scholarship. I especially want to thank Lilian's niece, Jill Armstrong, for her generosity in creating and organizing this wonderful event, and for her strategic help in getting the book The Art of the Renaissance book, the volume in honor of Lilian, completed and on the shelf. The loss of Lilian in November of 2022 has weighed very heavily on me as well as on many other people. But if there is a silver lining, it has been in getting to know Jill better. So thank you, Jill. Lilian was a very dear friend to me and an extraordinary mentor. The Book of Tributes presents new research by eminent and emerging scholars inspired by Lilian. So I'd like to give you a brief account of my own introduction to her research that occurred well before I ever met her. I vividly remember reading her landmark 1981 book, Renaissance Miniaturists and Classical Imagery, while a graduate student. Quite simply, I remember it as a transformative experience. While reading, it felt as if she was introducing me to an alternate Renaissance universe that had been previously unknown to me, filled with serious classical study, but also whimsy that she explicated with great rigor. I simply had to follow her into this world of playful sea creatures, cavorting putti, and quotations of ancient monuments to learn their place in relation to the art, literature, and life of Renaissance Venice. I had to learn her methods and what I could excavate with them. After completing my dissertation, I finally met Lilian, and she turned out to be not only an inspiring scholar, but always extraordinarily generous and kind in helping me and countless others in navigating research and careers. But I'm only one of many in all areas of book and manuscript studies and art history who have been inspired by Lilian's research and teaching. In editing the book in Lilian's honor, Renzo Baldasso, Ilaria, and I had to find a manageable focus, and that became the art of the Renaissance book. Each study addresses illustration or illumination of printed books and manuscripts. And so I'd like to thank our authors for their excellent work, and I hope you can read our book. The authors of essays in the Festschrift who are present today in this room are, and if you're here, I'd like you to briefly stand up so we can acknowledge you when I call your name. So, of course, first of all, Ilaria Andrioli also wrote an essay. Renzo Baldasso, who also helped initiate the book, so special thanks to him. Matilda Malaspina. Teresa Dorso. Susie Marcon. Ulrika Bauer-Eberhardt. There she is here. There she is. Thank you. And of course, Federica Toniolo and Giordana Mariani Canova. Those authors who could not attend here today, but maybe if they're here, please stand up too. Maybe I missed you. Are Martin Davies, Christina Bayer, Lotte Hellinga, Francois Avril, Lyle Humphrey, and Jonathan Alexander. My sincerest thanks to you all, and I hope that this volume inspires more scholars to study the Renaissance book and Lilian's research. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like now to introduce Giordana Mariani Canova, even if it might not be necessary. She's Professor Emerita at the University of Padua. She's an art historian with a specialization in the history of Italian manuscript painting, especially of the Veneto and Ferrara. But let me tell you a bit more about the extraordinary relationship between Giordana and Lilian and Jonathan Alexander. In the 1960s, they were three young scholars independently pursuing the study of unilluminated Italian incunabula. It was not until the 1970s, 10 years later, that they grew to know about each other. Although they lived far apart in Wellesley, Padua, and New York, they eventually collaborated on the monumental exhibition, The Painted Page, held at the Royal Academy in London in 1994 and at the Morgan Library in New York in 1995. They remain dear friends in frequent contact for decades. Their deeply probing and meticulous studies over the course of over 50 years transformed the disciplines of manuscript studies, book history, art history, in revealing the beauty and important roles of books and their embellishments in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance in Venice and the Veneto. I must add that in 1994, October 1994, when the exhibition took place, I had just started my PhD in London together with Laura Nuvoloni and under the supervision of Albinia de la Mer, professor of paleography in London, King's College. And as an opening and starting for our doctorate, we were taken to the exhibition, and there we met the world wonderful of Renaissance Italian illumination and decoration. And thank you very much. That has been inspiring ever since. The word is to Giordana.
Sono molto grata e commossa per essere stata qui oggi invitata a ricordare con voi Lilian Armstrong, rendendo omaggio alla sua personalità di donna e di studiosa. Con Lilian ci siamo conosciute giovanissime, fresche di studi universitari. Lei stava preparando la sua tesi di PhD alla Columbia University su Marco Zoppo, un pittore di educazione classicheggiante padovana, ma attivo a Venezia negli anni 70 del Quattrocento, rimanendo colpita soprattutto dal suo splendido libro di disegni a inchiostro con fantasia all'antica, conservato alla British Library. Nell'ambito di tale ricerca aveva avuto modo di scoprire che un simile tipo di disegno antiquario si incontrava anche nell'illustrazione di alcuni bellissimi e quasi sconosciuti libri a stampa veneziani prodotti al nascere delle prime tipografie a Venezia nel 1469-71, quando la cultura della città era tutta fervida di umanesimo. Con il suo acuto fiuto di ricercatrice aveva capito che questa poteva essere una stimolante e innovativa pista di indagine. Da parte mia avevo incontrato tale esperienza disegnativa nel corso di un'innovativa ricerca CNR sulla miniatura veneziana del Quattrocento diretta dal mio compianto maestro Rodolfo Pabulchini, pubblicando un articolo su Arte Veneta. Così ci incontrammo e avviammo un'amicizia che sarebbe durata tutta la vita. Lilian dunque veniva a Venezia in cerca di tracce, e tracce trovò, illustri e numerose, sia a Venezia, sia in un vasto numero di biblioteche europee e statunitensi che immediatamente prese a esplorare, in cerca dei suoi quasi sconosciuti incunaboli. E andò così aprendosi agli studi un mondo nuovo, un fenomeno unico e senza paragoni in Europa, quello di una produzione libraria che coniugava l'uso della nuovissima arte della stampa, basata sulla produzione dei multipla, con l'antico esercizio della miniatura, che personalizzava il libro stampato, facendone un unicum e dando testimonianza della cultura monistica del possessore e assai spesso col suo stemma. Nacque, come è stato ricordato, nel 1982 la seminale monografia sul cosiddetto maestro dei putti e il suo splendido alter ego maestro del Plinio di Londra, da lei scoperto, pubblicato a Londra presso Harvey Miller, cui seguì nel 1990 sulla rivista della Cini Saggi e Memorie di Storia dell'Arte lo studio fondamentale sul prolifico maestro di Plinio di Pico che a Venezia esercitò una vera attività di bottega. e seguirono via via numerosi saggi su personalità minori che Lilian andava via via scoprendo e attraverso le quali si venne definendo una vera e propria civiltà del manoscritto e dell'incunabolo miniata a Venezia. Tra i meriti di Lilian nei suoi lavori è di avere mostrato come nel Quattrocento, mentre nelle altre città italiane nascevano le illustri e ricchissime biblioteche private dei diversi signori, come i Medici, i Visconti, gli Estensi, a Venezia si formasse una grande biblioteca diffusa, una biblioteca di civitas, realizzata in modo corale dal più illustre patriziato, dagli umanisti, ma anche da ricchi e colti mercanti, vicini al mondo dei tipografi. Nel 1994, come pure è stato ricordato, Lilian diede un importante apporto al catalogo della grande mostra The Paint Page Italian Renaissance Book Illumination, tenutasi a Londra e New York, per iniziativa di Jonathan Alexander, un altro nome della miniatura, non solo veneta, e grandissimo amico di Lilian. Nel 2003 Lilian raccolse, sempre per Harvey Miller, i suoi studi sulla miniatura veneziana in 2 preziosi volumi, Studies on Venezia's Renaissance Miniaturist in Venice, che in qualche misura segna la fine di un'epoca di studi e l'inizio di un'altra. Infatti, sempre in cerca di nuovi orizzonti, all'inizio del terzo millennio, Lilian, esaurito il campo di studi sugli anni 60 e 70 del Quattrocento, fu affascinata da quella nuova straordinaria stagione dell'illustrazione libraria veneziana, in cui tra la fine del Quattrocento e l'inizio del Cinquecento i miniatori veneziani furono attratti dalla nuova tecnica della xilografia, facendosi essi stessi disegnatori di xilografie, cosicché a Venezia tra xilografia e miniatura non c'è stacco, ma continuità in una ricchezza straordinaria di prodotti, per i quali Venezia acquistò una nuova dimensione europea. In questo ambito venne emergendo la straordinaria personalità di Benedetto Vordon, padovano trasferito a Venezia, uomo di grande cultura e svariati interessi, che veramente cambiò il volto della miniatura e della xilografia veneziana, aggiornandola sulla nuova cultura e il suo nuovo classicismo di inizio secolo XVI, in particolare nel celebre polifilo edito nel 1499, a cui in larga parte collaborò. In questo ambito vanno anche ricordati gli ultimi studi di Lilian sull'imponente ciclo di corali della distrutta chiesa francescana di San Nicoletto della Lattuga a Venezia e nel 2008 il seminale catalogo degli incunaboli miniati xilografati della Biblioteca del Seminario di Padova, voluto da Federica Toniolo e preceduto da un saggio fondamentale di Lilian, che poi è stato pubblicato in volume da Edoardo Barbieri dell'Università Cattolica e direttore della rivista Bibliofilia. Nella sua ricerca Lilian ci ha dato un'eccezionale lezione di metodo. Non solo si è fatta pellegrina della miniatura, andando a cercare i suoi incunaboli, i suoi manoscritti anche nelle più remote biblioteche. Non solo ha individuato e messo a confronto lo stile dei diversi miniatori, ma ha anche condotto un'instancabile ricerca d'archivio, soprattutto qui al dilettissimo archivio dei Frari, che l'ha portato a individuare le diverse personalità dei committenti e degli artisti. E tutto questo materiale ha saputo organizzare con un ordine e una lucidità mentale straordinarie. Ho detto una volta, partecipando alla festa per il suo pensionamento, come leggendo i suoi saggi sembri che la ricerca sia giunta a risultati senza problemi. Ma questo perché Lilian sapeva risolvere i problemi e come risolti li presentava. E in tutti questi studi si legge un grande amore per Venezia, quasi la sua seconda patria, amore fortemente condiviso dal suo amatissimo marito Peter Ferguson, lui pure storico dell'arte. Dicevo all'inizio che oggi bisogna ricordare Lilian non solo come studiosa, ma anche come persona. E a questo proposito credo che quanti l'hanno conosciuta siano d'accordo nel riconoscere che era una persona assolutamente squisita. La sua gentilezza d'animo, la sua capacità di avvicinarsi con amorevolezza alle persone, il suo senso dell'amicizia, la sua disponibilità a sempre portare aiuto erano straordinarie e io desidero ringraziarla in particolare per la grande stima e amicizia nutrite verso gli studiosi italiani e per la sua disponibilità a pubblicare sulle nostre collane e sulle nostre riviste. E infine per la sua costante collaborazione alla Società di Storia della Miniatura, di cui era socia onoraria. E infine non posso fare a meno di ringraziarla per il grande esempio di amore che ci ha dato nell'infaticabile assistenza, del tutto dimentico di sé, prestata al suo amatissimo marito Peter durante la sua ultima malattia. Per il suo benessere non ha esitato a privarsi della sua splendida biblioteca e di tutta la sua fototeca, che fortunatamente l'Università di Tampa in Texas ha accolto, tramite Elena Zeppe, che vivamente per questo ringrazio. E così ringrazio tutti voi. Grazie.
Thank you, Giordana, not only for telling us what was the intuition that really sparkled all of Lilian's research, but also for emphasizing how she went about it. And that made all the difference. The fact that she went around the world looking for hundreds and hundreds of books, and that she prodded archives, whatever was necessary in her work, well, of course, always open to collaboration. And finally, the other important distinction that she made about the uniqueness of Venice and its libraries. While research in the Renaissance around Italy was inevitably focusing on court libraries, for Venice, Lilian emphasized how there were many, many distributed civic libraries, because Venice was a place where not only they produced large quantities of books, but they were used and kept in libraries. Thank you. And of course, you concluded with many expressions of affection and about her lifelong friendship with Lilian and with Peter. Thank you. I would like to introduce now Tracy Cooper, our next speaker, who is Professor of Art History at Temple University and one of the board of directors of Save Venice, where she is director of the Women Artists in Venice research program. She is best known for Palazzo's Venice, Architecture and Society in a Renaissance Republic, winner of the Phyllis Goddard Gordon Prize from the Renaissance Society of America. Tracy.
Well, it is a mixed blessing to be here today, and I think we all feel that way. The warmth that Lilian engenders has been evident. It's a privilege to be asked to pay tribute to Lilian here in Venice. Our first contact was when I was writing my thesis on the Codex Purpureus in the Renaissance. And I had seen a bibliographic reference to her dissertation on Marco Zoppo. And we corresponded and shared an appreciation not only of Venice, but of Padua. In 1984 to 1986, I came to Venice to research my dissertation, and happily coincided with Lilian on a research fellowship at a moment when she was really opening back up that chapter of her academic life. Lilian paid it forward. She had experienced, as many US students had, the kind of isolation that US students did not have a particular center in Venice for the kind of support that some of the other Nazione had at their behest. She became that for me and for a fellow dissertee who was also from Columbia and a student of another important figure in this story, David Rosand, student Thomas Martin. We were fortunate to spend the year here with her, and most often, and many years since, would meet at the Marciana. Under the sympathetic direction of Marino Zorzi, and with the help of manuscript experts Susie Marcon and Betty Lugato, we found another home there, and indeed in many of the other centers in Venice. And perhaps this is something that I would say is similar to what Christina had just mentioned, and that is the idea of Venice as a particular place in which perhaps it's just for the best that we don't have centers that isolate us, and instead we find ourselves working alongside our Venetian and other international colleagues. My dissertation, which was on the Church of San Giorgio Maggiore, also was indebted to Lilian in that the first campaign of building at San Giorgio Maggiore was the choir. And of course, if you have a new choir, you need to have new choir books. Of course, San Giorgio Maggiore was a Reformed Benedictine monastery under the new congregation of Santa Justina in Padua, which she and her dear friend and eminent scholar colleague, Giordana Mariana Canova, were brilliantly ahead of the time in understanding the circulation of these manuscripts, of the artists, and of the patrons. In many ways, they forecast today's study of networks, of mobility, of exchange, and certainly of intermediality. In fact, the last article I published returned to the same subject. I wish that it could have been in this volume. But of course, I did count on Lilian to help take a look at what I had been thinking about. She, as usual, gave generously, not only of her time and her knowledge, but she also put me in contact with some of the more recent developments, such as Searle. And I am thrilled that this opportunity to celebrate Lilian brings me together with so many of the important scholars of her life and new ones, I hope, in mind. We also traded recent work, including other books that she had recently written and that have already been referred to by Giordana and others. And she and Peter paid a visit to Princeton just before, a month before the pandemic hit. We remained in contact, and I was pleased finally to be able to share my publication with her in appreciation for all the help she had given me. It's hard to fathom we won't be meeting up at the Renaissance Society of America or sharing a meal here in Venice. I will miss the visits with her and Peter in London, ever a refuge, as well as a delight. I remember in 2010, following an RSA in Venice, she and Peter and Jonathan Alexander had gone on one of their book trips. I think visiting little obscure Hilltown libraries, only to go return their car in Milan to find European air traffic had ground to a halt due to Iceland's unpronounceable volcanic eruption. Sure enough, they kept the car forged onto Calais, stopping for a good French meal on the way, then to Dover, where they had to abandon the car out in the back of the lot someplace, as millions of others apparently had, and returned to London. A mutual friend, also in this area, Bronwyn Wilson, and I had been marooned at a conference in Glasgow following RSA and decided to try our own luck in London to find a way back to the States, where indeed our luck came in the form of Lilian and Peter and their ever-welcoming hospitality. Her wealth of wisdom and friendship is sorely missed, but I think has been passed on to many of us, for which I hope we all continue to practice and, of course, to share some of that with her niece, Jill Armstrong. Thank you for today.
Thank you. I would like now to introduce Friedrich Elchmann, who received his PhD from Columbia University with a dissertation on Jacopo Tintoretto's early period. Since 2001, he has been curator of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Since 2016, he has been the chairman of the board of Save Venice, the well-known organization from the US devoted to conservation of the art and architecture of Venice. Friedrich.
So, good afternoon. I'm going to say just a very few words about Lilian in Boston, Lilian and Venice, and Lilian and Save Venice. Also speaking on behalf of her students official and her students unofficial. I'm in the second category. And about the difference she made to all of our lives. Now, Lilian wasn't really a resident of Boston, right? Of course, famously lived in Wellesley, an alumna of the college, and then taught there for 40 years. But she deeply believed in the idea of the collective University of Greater Boston, all the different colleges and universities that come together to make Boston such an exciting center for thought. And she took it upon herself as a sort of welcome committee. She would invite to lectures, or particularly if you needed extra reassurance, to her lovely home and garden for a meal or a cup of tea. She was always encouraging and always making introductions. Within a paragraph or two, she would say, "Oh, have you met so-and-so yet?" And then when she got, she'd also, if you were being a little tentative, she would say, "Would you like to be introduced?" She loved making connections. And then once she knew you well enough, she would follow up a question. "Have you managed to finish another chapter?" So very, always full of advice, but always, always warm. She was full of, she had a genuine sunny disposition, was full of warm wishes, liked to give advice, liked to listen, extremely good at listening, always kept up with a very wide range of people. She made regular visits to Venice, really a second home for her, was very diligent about following scholarly pursuits, attending lectures, giving talks, teaching in courses, and she really kept up on the restorations sponsored by Save Venice of painting, sculpture, architecture, etc. She would make regular trips with Peter to visit the Save Venice restorations with Melissa Kahn, and then come back and tell everyone what she had seen and why this particular work of art was in a new light, or the discoveries that had been made. I should also emphasize that I'm not just new to Lilian and Peter. I met Peter when I was about 6 years old, still in short pants, and Lilian just within a year or two after that. And I feel in a way that I grew up with them, and that when our paths later managed to include Venice and Save Venice, I felt all the more fortunate. She attended every lecture in Boston sponsored by Save Venice, whether the topic was something right in her heart, Renaissance art, or pretty far out there, like the Biennale dell'Arte. She was just appreciative of the scholarly community that could come together. My absolute favorite memory of Lilian in Boston, or Lilian and Save Venice, was the Young Friends of Save Venice Boston Carnevale. So February, I think, 2003. She and Peter were probably 30 years older than the average age of the rest of the party, a 20-something gathering. But she had a great dress, Peter had a tuxedo. They had donated very generously a beautiful case of Italian red wine to the auction. They danced, they met, shook hands with everyone, and they made clear that that party in Boston was the place to be. Lilian, as we know, was a woman of culture, of good manners, of dedication, of expertise, of warmth. And when we think of the loss of Lilian, we might decide that they don't make them like that anymore, that it's the end of an era. I mean, her death is such a loss, of course. I miss her very much. But we can console ourselves, I believe, by remembering that Lilian was such a good teacher, so thoughtful, such a good mentor, both to her official students and her unofficial ones, that we are all well equipped to do our part and live up to Lilian's splendid example. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. I would like now to introduce Carolina Wamsler, who is the program director of Columbia University's summer program here in Venice. Trained as a Renaissance art historian at Wellesley College and Columbia University, she is especially interested in Venice, municipal imagery in Renaissance Italy, and public-private spaces and gardens in the urban fabric of Venice. Carolina, please.
Christina, thank you for your kind introduction. In fact, this afternoon, the single most important detail about my biography is that I was a student of Lilian Armstrong. As we have heard, she has taught many of us, but I believe that among the speakers and the people in the room today, that I am the only one she taught in the classroom during her many, many decades as the Mildred Lane Kempner Professor of Art History at Wellesley College. There is no question that she changed my life on a sunny spring afternoon during her office hours my sophomore year, when she asked me whether I had ever considered majoring in art history. In fact, it is Lilian and that very moment that bring me here today. And while I might be the only student of Lilian's among today's speakers, I am only one of hundreds of Wellesley women she taught and whom she introduced to the beauties and wonders of art history. Jill, as I mentioned the other day, since you circulated the invitation for today's wonderful celebration, I have heard from a whole handful of her and Peter Ferguson's students and fellow students, and I am quite certain that a lot of them are joining us online. With her quiet and earnest manner, Ms. Armstrong as we knew to call her from the simple white cartellino that marked her office door, taught us to fall in love with the visual arts and to look at works with attentive care. She opened our eyes to the magnificence of the Italian Renaissance and to the profound pleasure that comes with inquiry, research, and curiosity. However, she did so much more. She modeled for us exceptional respect for learning and teaching, the importance of our commitment to our professional paths, and the belief in unlimited possibilities. She took us seriously, so we took our work seriously, and she has served as a model ever since. My friend and fellow Wellesley alumna, Nina Diamond, described one of the ways that made Lilian Armstrong this extraordinary model when she wrote earlier this week, quote, "Here was a person, and a woman especially, who was resolved and secure in her intellectual and scholarly self. Simultaneously firm, yet gentle, Lilian touched our lives in ways that are immeasurable. We could tell that she wanted us to be and do the best we could be. She fiercely modeled the highest standards, and she never lost sight of the joy that comes with serious inquiry. Now we all carry little pieces of her passion and her love for the visual arts, as well as her profound commitment to all she did, forward into the next generation. In my case, Lilian Armstrong also opened the doors to my other great teacher, already evoked today, and that is David Rosand, her friend, colleague, and graduate schoolmate during their years at Columbia University. It was with him that I completed my PhD studies, also at Columbia University, and I am now here in Venice, trying to do exactly what Lilian and David modeled for me. In my capacity as the resident director of Columbia University's summer program in Venice, I seek to plant the very seeds of curiosity that instill in our students the desire to learn, to explore, and to fall in love with art history and, of course, with Venice. While the Columbia University summer program is in its 20th year, this is the first year we are hosting the program at Casa Muraro, named for Michelangelo Muraro, now Columbia University's Research Library and Study Center for Venetian Studies. And for more on Casa Muraro, I turn the podium over to my dear colleague and friend, Professor Holger Klein.
Thank you, Carolina. I will now briefly introduce Holger Klein, who is the Lisa and Bernard Seltz Professor of Medieval Art History at Columbia University. His research focuses on late antique, early medieval, and Byzantine art and architecture. More specifically, on the cult of relics, reliquaries, and issues of cultural and artistic exchange. He is the faculty director of Casa Muraro, Columbia University's Study Center, Research Library, and Exhibition Space here in Venice.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's a distinct honor and a great pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon to celebrate Lilian Armstrong. and to offer a heartfelt tribute to her. Unlike many, if not all speakers we have just heard, I did not have the privilege to know Lilian well, even though I was, of course, very much aware of her scholarly reputation and occasionally read a warm and enthusiastic letter of recommendation from her on behalf of a Wellesley student applying to the PhD program at Columbia University. In fact, it was only in March 2019 that I first met Lilian and Peter in a more private rather than a purely academic setting in Boston. The occasion was an intimate gathering of Columbia alumni, friends, and former colleagues at the Cambridge home of Jonathan Rosand and Judy Polacek, who helped to spread the word about Columbia's recent efforts to turn the former Dorsoduro home and library of Michelangelo Muraro into a state-of-the-art research and teaching center for American students and scholars in Venice. After Carolina and I presented our vision for Casa Muraro, Lilian told us how very pleased she was about the prospect for such a home away from home for Columbia graduate students and American scholars conducting their research in Venice. Those of us who have made the Serenissima and her artistic legacy a lifelong professional passion know only too well that it takes first and foremost a robust network of local friends and colleagues willing to facilitate access to lesser-known monuments, locked churches and chapels, precious objects, or fragile manuscripts. The same is true for the treasure trove of documents hiding in the fondi and buste of the Archivio di Stato and other local archives, where a benevolent friend or patient academic mentor can unlock an entire world of knowledge to the academic novice or uninitiate newcomer. When Lilian arrived in Venice in the early 1960s as a Columbia graduate student and a young scholar, she had to establish and rely on exactly such a network of friends and colleagues to get her academic feet wet, if you allow me the pun, in the established circles of Venetian scholarship. Among her academic peers and fellow Columbia graduate students was David Rosand, 2 years her junior, who likewise started to make Venice his academic home in those early years of the 1960s, and who eventually took over Lilian's apartment in Campo Bandiera e Moro. For David Rosand, it was the Venetian art historian Michelangelo Muraro who became a guiding star and a local mentor in these formative years of dissertation research in Venice. Mick Muraro, who had met Bernard Berenson in Venice and Itati in 1949, and later visited the United States when he became a member of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton in 1956-57, appreciated the much younger American colleagues, opened his home to David Rosand and others, and they and their families soon developed a deep friendship that should last for a lifetime. On several occasions in the 1960s, Muraro hosted students not only from Columbia, but also from Smith College in Venice, here in Venice, and to the Muraro home, and invited them to the Muraro home, overlooking the garden of Cadario and located just one bridge beyond the house and collection of Peggy Guggenheim. That became an informal salon and a regular meeting point for American students and scholars in Venice. And you see some of those aspects of the life of Mick Muraro, Lilian, and David up here, together with an image of Casa Muraro. Mick Muraro died in 1991, but he and his wife, Maria Teresa, who survived him by 12 years, made the decision to bequeath their house to Columbia University for the benefit of future generations of American students exploring the rich artistic legacy of Venice and the Veneto. Shortly after Maria Teresa passed away in 2003, David Rosand and one of his former PhD students, Johanna Fassel, established Columbia's summer program in Venice in partial fulfillment of the terms of the bequest to turn the house into a center for Venetian studies. Now in its 18th year, as Carolina mentioned, and directed by Lilian and David's former student Carolina Wamsler, the program is Columbia's most long-lasting and successful summer program abroad, and it is open to students from all other American colleges and universities. This year, after a successful renovation of the house, generously funded by the Rosand family and other loyal friends and supporters, the summer program is taking place for the first time at Casa Muraro proper. Next year, the Muraro archives and library will return from storage, supplemented by recent gifts from other American scholars of Venice, including David Rosand, Patricia Mailman, and now Lilian Armstrong. We can trust that their legacies will live on in the books they published and the scholarship they helped to generate. At Casa Muraro, their works will be accessible for future generations of American Venezianisti who, much like Lilian and David in the 1960s, will come to the lagoon to chart their own scholarly paths by following the examples of others and relying on benevolent Venetian scholars willing to extend a helping hand and to provide much-needed guidance in the rough seas of scholarly opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Holger. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Jill Armstrong, Lilian's niece. Jill is an economist who worked for the World Bank in Washington, D.C. for 33 years. She's joined here by her son, Luca Albisetti, who has just finished his MBA in hotel management from the École Hôtelière de Lausanne. Jill will speak.
Thank you very much. Warm, warm greetings to the family, friends, colleagues, and students of Lilian here in this room and around the world. As you know, I'm her niece, Jill, and my son and I are here to represent our family who are watching from America. Lilian's brother, my father, Bob, her sister-in-law, Sandy, my own sister, and her son, along with many dear cousins who are also watching, and so I salute them too. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to the Istituto Veneto di Scienze, Lettere e Arti for hosting us here in this beautiful space, and we'll hopefully have nice weather continue for an aperitivo outside. It is the circle of Lilian's life that brings us here today. This circle embodies Lilian as an advocate of women's education at Emma Willard School for Girls, at Wellesley College, at Columbia, right through to her scholarship in early printed books, or so-called incunabula for those who aren't familiar with the term of the 14 and 1500s. Running throughout all of this is her love of Venice and the Veneto, something which she passed on to me. In 2020, the year before she died and during the COVID epidemic, her colleague, Bettina Wagner, asked Lilian if she could help shed light on how research in illuminated incunabula had developed over the years. Answering questions of how did your own work on this topic get triggered, who inspired you, who taught you, resulted for Lilian in a scholarly article. What else would she write than a scholarly article? In the Bulletin du Bibliophile. In this memoir, her last published work, she writes, and I quote, "For their quasi-obligatory Wanderjahr in Europe, a lot of the Harvard students went to Florence and Itati, while the Columbia students tended to go to Rome to the American Academy. So I decided to go to Venice instead." She lived in Venice in the Campo Bandiere Moro for the 1961-62 academic year in the Casa Molinari. You will have seen a photograph of this Campo and Lilian posing on the balcony, which is still there overlooking the Church of the Bragora. In 1961, it was not easy for young foreign scholars to conduct art historical research in Venice, let alone a young woman. And as she noted, there was no supporting structure of an American Academy or an Itati. But in those days, there was Michelangelo Muraro, who we've just heard about. He took Lilian and other young scholars, including David Rosand and his wife, Ellen, under his wing. The Muraros would welcome young scholars into their studies and into their home for a dish of pasta. Now, as we've just heard, that home, Casa Muraro, will provide a home in Venice for Venetian studies at Columbia University. There have been many accolades to celebrate her contributions, and you've heard about some of them here today, to her scholarship and the profession she dearly loved, which was teaching. In 2009, her high school alma mater, the Emma Willard School for Girls, awarded her a Distinguished Alumni Award. They noted that, and I quote, "Her curriculum vitae is a work of art. Among its many pages lie her personal masterpieces: 3 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, a residency at the American Academy in Rome, a fellowship at the Getty, and the honor of being named the first recipient of Wellesley College's Marion Butler McLean Chair in the History of Ideas." It then went on to say, quote, "Harder to quantify, but surely magnificent, are the countless women she has taught, mentored, and inspired to pursue art history through her more than 4 decades of teaching at Wellesley College. Lilian Armstrong embodies Emma Willard's mission through her enduring devotion to the cause of educating women. Carolyn Wamsler is but one of these wonderful women." In the area of scholarship, the Fondazione Cini has launched a project of an illustrated copy census of the first Venetian edition of Dante's Commedia of 1491, with beautiful, beautiful illustrations of the kind that Lilian studied. Around 100 libraries in the world will be involved in this project, which has been very generously dedicated to Lilian's memory. As we heard earlier, she spent endless hours in countless libraries, public and private, around the world, bringing the beautiful images of Incunabula, so often hidden from view, to life, connecting the dots of who painted what for whom, and the relations between artists and patrons was also her passion. To appreciate her dogged determination to figure out the mysteries of these works of the 14 and 1500s, one only has to know that she was an avid reader of detective stories, whodunits, or as we say in Italian, I gialli. If the story took place in Venice, she was in seventh heaven, and she adored Commissario Brunetti, for those of you who know Commissario Brunetti. While she herself spent decades scoring libraries and their collections for illustrations in Incunabula, she was a firm advocate of leveraging technology to facilitate such scholarship. The 15th Century Book Trade project to digitize images brought new energy into her work. To do this, it meant understanding absolutely everything about computers and evolving technology. And I'm sure some in this room were dogged by her, as I was, to give her step-by-step details which she wrote down so she could understand exactly what she needed to know. So let me also thank all of the authors of this very handsome volume, and there's a copy outside for you to see, and to single out Helena Zeppe for her devotion to Lilian, especially in helping to transfer Lilian's professional library, as well as her husband, Peter Ferguson's, to that of the University of South Florida. In addition to our family, I would like to single out a few special people who have enriched Lilian's life beyond words. Giordana Mariana Canova and Jonathan Alexander, who together as 3 pioneers in their shared field were lifelong friends. Giorgio and Elisabetta Valentini and their daughter Christina, who was also Lilian's goddaughter, have been dear friends in Venice here for more than 6 decades. Fellow graduate student Edie Foster, and you saw a picture of Lilian with Edie and her German Shepherd dog, with whom she shared the Casa Molinari apartment, took a vow that year in 1961-62 not to speak a word of English, only Italian. And of course, we remember her colleague, her friend, and her life companion, Peter Ferguson, who went to join her after 2 short months that we lost her. So now I'd like to close the circle. In addition to the wonderful, wonderful book we have before us today, I'm proposing that we also honor her work, her life, her love of Venice, by establishing the Lilian Armstrong Fellowship Fund at Columbia University, an endowment which would support Columbia graduate fellowships in Venice based at Casa Moraro. These scholarships would continue to honor her passion for education and for scholarship. There is an urgent need to save not only the art and architecture in the city she loved, but also preserve the culture of Venice, making Venice again a city for Venetians, as well as those who flock to see her splendors. The glorious past of Venice can also be its glorious future, but it will take concerted and coordinated efforts across many disciplines by many scholars if Venice is to be here for future generations. It is our hope that the endowment will help to further that mission. Lilian would have been so honored and touched to be here today, and in a way, I know she is. As with Festschrifts, the book is usually presented to the honored scholar. So in closing, I would like to formally present the book to her. May the circle be unbroken and live on in honor of Lilian. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. You will all hear about this wonderful initiative in the next few days to come. The family will get in touch about it, about the endowment. May I also remind you that book orders, if you would like to order the Festschrift, are available in the room at the entrance. And now we would like to invite you all outside on the terrace to raise a glass in honor to Lilian. Thank you.